So what I want to do is look at assessment, feedback, and motivation, talk about some of my own projects, and situate that within the work, the context of other work, and where I think perhaps this work should go. So I'd like to start off the little video. So what did that tell us about e-assessment? And this is a picture drawn by a student, work of Chris McKillop at Stirling. It was her thesis work. She asked them to write narratives about assessment. They weren't very good at writing narratives, but they were good at drawing pictures. And you can see the tremendous task. Here's the exams, you know, the big sign. There's a big hill to climb, and it looks rather steep. So from the student's perspective, you know, assessment is quite difficult. But what about from the tutor's perspective? You know, all this marking that we have to do, which can be absolutely dreadful, but we want to give, you know, students great feedback. And what about our, you know, theoretical positions, or where we feel we are with our teaching? Now, if I ask you all to put your hands up, I'm sure you'd say you're all constructivists, okay? But what about assessment? So we have a big push with constructivism, and I think with the tools, social learning, you know, we're getting there. But what about assessment? Now, okay, you know, we're universities, or you know, the school regulation and the boards, they are giving people pieces of paper that help them move in their careers and do other things. So we've got an institutional reliability and accountability pool. So there is a tension there. And, you know, assessment for some students, and this was a particular drawing, you know, he's got a gun there. It can be absolutely daunting. So I think we have to think about the student perspective and their emotions as well when it comes to assessment. So my thesis today is, do we have, with e-assessment, a wolf in sheep's clothing? Okay. So let's look at some things that we do with e-assessment and multiple choice questions. Now, okay, I might say, oh, there are multiple guess questions. But actually, at the CAA conference that I'm chairing in the summer, we're going to have an invited symposium from the medics, people who are working in this area. And multiple choice questions are actually very, very successful in the medical domain. And why shouldn't they be? You know, if you've got a lot of things to learn, and you've got lots of names to remember, you've got things you must know, why not do it with this format? Also, we know that they can practice, and here there's teaching nurses how to do drug administration, because they've got a lot of maths to work out, you know, with the dosage, etc. And these have been very successful. And, you know, there are multiple choice questions that are used for high stakes assessment. And this can be done with first-year students. I know in the United States they're very keen on multiple choice questions. And, you know, I don't have a problem with those. And here there's an example that we use at Cambridge University. It's for admissions, okay, with the thinking skills. Now, what was interesting when I spoke to them, because I was collecting a number of case studies for the JISC about e-assessment, they said that by using this system, they were able to prove that 2 students were not cheating. Okay, because when they got the findings back, they'd made the same mistakes. But when they looked at the logs, they'd done the questions in different orders. Although they were in the same room, as they'd come up to Cambridge with the computers, they weren't actually plagiarizing. So there was an advantage there to using this system. Now, this is something that I'm very proud of, really, because we have this high-stakes assessment for Maths for Learning. It's only a 10-point course. But what you do is you get feedback during the exam, okay? Now, it was terrible to get this through the university, but in the end we did. This is because, like here, you don't have to have any qualifications to join. And so students take the first-year science course. But if they want to move on in science, they have to have, you know, a capability in mathematics. So if you don't have that, you take this 10-point course before you can move on. Now, we said, okay, what you'll do is you'll have a practice system. You will have it at home, this same system. You get feedback, and you practice with it, and then you take the test. Now, they said, well, what about cheating? So we said, okay, it's only 10 points. If the students cheat, they won't be able to do their science course. It is not in their interest. We leave them responsible. So what happens during the test is if you get more feedback during the summative task, you don't get as many marks. So this is one way of you know, giving feedback during a summative exam that is not, it's high stakes, but not worth so much. So this is something I'm trying to persuade my colleagues to think about at the university. And we've also been looking at bringing cameras into the home when people are taking examinations. The reason is that the main driver for that is cost, because we have students who are disabled, who have problems, and we have to send somebody to their home because they have to have rests or whatever, and that costs us a tremendous amount of money to send somebody to the home. And this could, you know, with cameras or looking in and vigilating in some other way, could help the student and us. So, self-diagnosis, because we're talking about self-regulation. Why are we doing formative feedback? Why are we, what's our main goal here? And it's to help the students to understand about how to learn and to self-regulate. And a very successful course was run by Vivian Cyber with first-year medical students, teaching them basic IT skills, and they were done at a distance at Oxford. We've got competency-based testing, and students like to repeat tests for revision. It's important that they practice Sadler's work, and also if you're starting off something, especially with us, with open universities where people have no qualifications, if they can do some self-diagnosis and practice, it's a good thing. Now, I want to introduce you to Eliot's notions and his characteristics of assessment 2 activities. And we know that we've got new tools and we're using them in our teaching, but are we using them in our assessment? And he talks about these characteristics, and Simon Cross and myself started to look at authentic assessment, and we've got some papers in the CAA archive. And when you look at the literature, it's very difficult to define authentic assessment. It means all things to all people as normal when we start looking into a new area. But there's something important about authentic assessment, and especially, you know, if we have professional people coming to do professional master's courses with us. So here are a number of characteristics, and I'm going to go through some examples and highlight some of these. So, authentic assessment. Here's a case study, and I'll tell you why I picked this one. This is a technical college with students who, you know, find it hard to write, okay? But they're learning to be chefs. And what this tutor did, he got the students to photograph, as you can now on your mobile phone, and he was using Bluetooth to send the pictures back to the tutor. and they were putting these into their portfolios. But why I want to stress and why I want to bring this to your attention is that by using this technique, this tutor admitted and said, admitted is, that sounds, no, he was delighted, sorry, that using this technique, it was changing the pedagogy. I'll explain. What happened was, because the students were sending back what they were doing in the field, when he started his theory in the classroom, and they were all there, he was able to draw on those examples, real examples, to illustrate the theory that he was talking about. And these are students who find it difficult with the writing, the conceptual side, and passing examinations. And this made a big difference to his retention and to the way he was working in the classroom. So in learning design, you know, I love learning design. I love the colleagues who write about it, but they still push the assessment on the end. Here, you've got the assessment, you know, coming back in, changing the pedagogy. And this is what I would consider an ideal situation. Okay. Peer assessment. Now, what's important about peer assessment? Well, people are talking about assessment literacy because, you know, understanding what really is required of you and showing you how you're going to be examined is important, but you don't really understand it till you start doing it yourself. Now, students can be very wary of peer assessment, but one thing that I think is important here is the WebPA tool from Loughborough. Now, it was built because they did a lot of peer assessment. They'd, you know, done it, trialed all this a lot of times before they built the tool. And I think what's important about this for other people is not that you don't necessarily want to use this tool, but go and have a look at it. But what they found was that, you know, students want everything to be fair. Yeah, they want to make sure everything's fair. And when they used the tool, it was, you know, done electronically. They had to put in when they were going to submit. They could see when things were going to be marked, the whole timetable. They felt it wasn't one person doing this, but it was fair, there was parity, and people kept to the timetable. So, mobile technologies. We know that our students work when they can, on the train, perhaps not in the bath, but you know, when they can. But also, this paper by Vivaldi and Nussbaum showed that in South America, they were using, the kids had got mobile phones, they were using it in the classroom, 3 of them together, looking at the multiple choice questions and discussing them. So as a vehicle. So, you know, making our things mobile is very important. And I heard from your educational technology yesterday how the formats that you are providing your materials in will be able to support this mobile applications. And of course, in face-to-face, now what's important, sort of a form of formative assessment is when they poll the students. They can vote about different things. And you can ask very interesting questions when you are voting, when the students are voting, and they can see how people are answering. And this is something that we are introducing in our courses as well, how, you know, during part of an activity, you could vote on the assessment. And I think it's important to go back to the literature and say, why are we giving feedback? Why electronically? Why is it so important to carry out formative assessment? And of course, Black and Williams' work, where they did a meta-analysis of all the papers, I mean, an effect size between 0.4 and 0.7 is absolutely enormous. Hattie's work, of course, and his more recent book shows you clearly what's important, and that's the teaching, and but the effect sizes that can take place. In primary schools in the UK, they're also using systems where the children, when they are working, you know, at tables and in groups, they use a traffic light system. They put up when they're confident about what they're doing, you know, they're happy with it, and they start to help one another. So working in a formative way, practicing and declaring that you're not sure and seeking help has become very important in our primary system. But the question I want to try and address now is how can we support our students to become more reflective learners and engage in formative assessment tasks and think about the emotional state. Collaborative learning is difficult, and what do we give our students at a distance? For me, it's important that they have, if you're going to collaborate, you want to collaborate on something that needs collaboration. Yeah, it's not to be a toy task. Now, here's an example that I've been working with where it's about global warming. And you can change the variables, as you can see on the left-hand side, and then there's a change in the chart. And the tasks associated with this, with our first level science course, you know, are quite problematic. They're difficult to do. And so here we've got the variables are changing, and we can see an output. What we've done is we built Buddy Space I did this with Mark Eisenstadt, and I don't know if it's the case here, but we can actually, our students can see where the other students are on their course, and the green means, you know, they're available because they're, you know, they're working late at night, early in the morning or whatever. And what we did, and this is a few years ago now, we linked the students together, we yoked them without full screen sharing. So all you did is when the mouse clicks, you change the difference with the mouse click via the internet. Because students live in Wales, they live in remote areas of Scotland, and the internet speed is not great in these areas. And so this worked very well. And then they were able to talk to one another about what was going on as well. And you can see the screen underneath. One of the questions, of course, with formative assessment, e-assessment, is when do you give feedback and how many times should you give feedback? How should we organize that? So I'd like to give you an example that from Ailey Fowler. And she was working with Spanish, teaching Spanish. She's a programmer, and but it was for the Spanish module. And what they found was they had 1,000 students. I think they had 3 tutors, and it was impossible to give quick feedback. And you know with learning languages that if you don't correct errors quickly, they become fossilized. Very difficult. So they said to Ailey, can you do something for us? Help us with some electronic system. And she built this LISC solution, and it means that students can independently practice sentence translation. They receive immediate, and as she says, robust feedback on the errors, and they can deal with these errors. Now, they're allowed 2 goes, 2 submissions, and they are unequally weighted. As I was saying, you know, before when we do that test with the maths, the more help you get, the less marks you get. Now, after trialing, they found that if there are 2 goes, give the most marks to the first attempt. Otherwise, the students won't try so hard because they know they're going to get the answer. And of course, the more information you've given, the lower the mark you get when you finally submit. So I think this has been trialed. It's been used with thousands of students now. And I think this is a good heuristic for when you're thinking about how you're going to mark and how many attempts you want students to try when they're undertaking the tasks. Okay, so what about this emotional response? And I showed you those pictures at the beginning about how students feel. And, you know, even ourselves when we receive feedback, you know, about our papers from reviewers, you know. And one of my students didn't show me the feedback for 3 months. They hid it in a drawer from a journal, and then when they showed it to me, it wasn't that bad. I thought it was very good. As I said, I've had worse myself, you know. So, you know, so it's difficult at times to receive feedback, and we often think, you know, telling people how to put their mistakes right, you know, it's purely cognitive. Well, it isn't purely cognitive, especially when you don't see the person. You can't see their face, you can't see if they're smiling at you, you don't know how bad it is. So can Bales, that's Bales categories, help with this? Okay. Bales was a psychologist in the 1950s, and what he looked at, and he worked for 20 years on these categories, refining them, what he looked at was group interactions. And what he found that in a group that works amazingly well, you have got a cognitive lead, a leader with a task, but also somebody who can support the emotional side, keep the group together. And it could be in the same person, but those skills are there. And why I was attracted to these categories was because they have socio-emotive categories. They talk about positive responses and negative responses. And now there is a set of categories, Flanders categories, which are to do with teaching. And I looked at those sorts of systems, but they were more to do with classroom control as opposed to what's going on in a group. So there are 4 main categories, and they were positive, they were negative, and questions were there. But there was directing of the group, which I'm calling teaching. I've calling that teaching because that matched more with what we're doing. So here's an example. This is taken from these are his categories. So the positive reactions shows solidarity, shows tension release, shows agreement, and there are examples. And then there are attempted answers, which I'm calling the B categories, more like teaching, where you give suggestions, you give an opinion, you give information, and the questioning, asking for information, opinion, and suggestion, and then the negative reaction shows disagreement. So these categories looked as though they should be the sorts of things that our tutors should be doing when they're giving feedback to our students. And I must confess, the team analysed thousands of assignments, okay? But this is just assignments from one of the courses in our masters. I'm going to stand up, actually, because I can't do this without standing up, but I'm really excited about this graph. The A are the A categories, yeah? This is the positive reactions. Now, pass 1 is higher than pass 4. So let's just look at the positive reactions. With the higher passes, there's more praise, yeah? The lines are longer down here. That seems very reasonable to me, yeah? If you've done more right things, it's for me to tell you, you got that right, well done. Here are the B categories, which were what I called the teaching categories, giving information, suggestions. Now look here. The higher passes, the lines are smaller. Where the student hasn't done so well, the lines are longer, so more. Not unreasonable. If you've done things incorrectly, you're not getting such a good mark, I need to tell you, give you more support, yeah? So if you're not doing so well, me as the tutor has to help you more. Now, these are the questions. Now the questions, there are less questions for the higher grades than the lower grades. And my original hypothesis was going to be that they'd be the other way around. I thought that if the student was doing really well, that I, as the tutor, would be pushing you, questioning you, helping you to move, do even better. And I found it was the other way round. And then it took me a long time to realize what was going on, because in English, we are very polite, yes, well, most of the time. So to our students, instead of saying, you should have added X to this argument here, we say, have you thought about adding X here? So there's more questioning here just because of the construction of the language. Okay, so they are helping, actually. In fact, in some ways, they're more teaching comments, so that would make those lines longer. But there isn't a lot of negativity, and when we train our tutors, we do train them about praising and negativity. And if you saw a lot of negativity, even if things are wrong, there are ways of saying this, we would be very worried, yeah? So this was a pattern that came out, which was amazing, actually. I wasn't expecting it all to be quite like that, but that was encouraging. And so you can see the trends there. The pie, that's represented as a pie chart. So that most of the comments are the teaching comments. That's the maroon part of the graph. Now, the next question was, would this be the case in other subject domains? My initial hypothesis, no, it wouldn't. It would be different. But what we found is in science, in maths, in business, the trends were exactly the same. Why would that be the case? I was very surprised, because we're not going to be looking at the content per se. We're looking at how they are teaching. And what's, underneath all this is that we are teaching and trying to support our students in the same way for the grade awarded, okay, depending on the pass that's given. So what we built was Open Mentor. And this is an open source tool, and it looks at all the comments that the tutors made and puts it against the mark awarded. Now, the tutors are professional people in their subject domain. They know how to mark. They know what they're worth. So we're not looking at the marking. What we're trying to evaluate is, have you given the students enough support for the mark you have given them? So the smart thing here was to use the Bales categories, because if we had to make our own categories, I'm not sure it would have worked so well. So here are some examples of positive reactions: good work, negative, this does not follow, or no could be there. Questioning, can you explain what you mean? And we found that, I suppose it's the same here in Catalan or in Spanish, that when we're giving feedback, we say yes, but. Okay, there's always the but on the end, okay? And so what we did is we made up a number of rules to fit the categories. And here are some more examples of positive reactions, and here are the example rules. They're not difficult rules. It's pattern matching. It's not too much intelligence there. It's only, and the thing that's amazing is that it's only 175 rules. It was amazing. It was just, but I put it down due to the Bales categories. So here we've got some attempted.
The positive reactions are always praising the student.
Yeah, the praise, yeah. So here are some examples of the comments that we put for the B category: attempted answers, gives opinion. And then we went to see, is the rule set generic? And we found the rule set was generic. We could actually use this and test with all our subjects, as long as it was electronically returned and the comments were on the side typewritten onto the text. So we now have a new interface last week, so I didn't have time to change the slides. But welcome to Open Comment, Open Mentor. It'll tell you all about the system, all about Open Mentor. There's all background. And then it will feed back to you. You have to put the mark in. It'll feed back to you all your comments and how we've classified them. But more importantly, it shows you we've got an algorithm underneath how many comments you've made and what would be expected for this grade. Now, the reason I got funded to build this, the university gave me money because we monitor so many scripts from our tutors, yeah, or the thousands of them. We monitor them, just so many per course. But we haven't used this to pick out scripts that are problematic for monitoring. We haven't done that. I'm using it to help me train tutors new to the university about how you can give support. But with the with the advent of the student survey in the UK is immensely important. You know, you rate, feedback, whatever it is. And these findings are made public, and students pay a lot of money now, and they're looking to see what sort of support they're getting from their universities. So Open Mentor was a bit before its time, but now it's receiving tremendous interest, and the JISC funded me to transfer this technology to King's College London and to Southampton University. And we've been working on that project, so it's now working for them. And here's some background. And we've published that work too now with that transfer. And of course, what's important here is the algorithm underneath, where you want to say, well, you know, are you coming up to, you know, are the comments what we would expect in our university? You can change that algorithm because it's open source, and you can actually fix that depending on what you want in your university. So anything that can help students, tutors, give feedback, I think is important. But feedback associated with a grade, you've got to give the right feedback for the grade awarded. And we often work alone, don't we, marking and doing this. And so in a training session, you can work together, and we give you example text, so you're looking at examples, so you can see how it's doing. Now, let me tell you about another project. And of course, it's from the Open stable. They're all got open on their names, Open Comment. So this was C-Chord funding from the university because we were very concerned about the arts faculty. The multiple choice and all sorts of drag and drop, all sorts of different questions were being used by science and mathematics. But the arts faculty said, you know, we don't really want this. We want to do something different. And we'd like to do something with free text. So this is a system that allows free text entry, and it's with history. What I wanted to do was find a tutor, a history tutor, who'd work with me, who believed in causality, because computers aren't smart, okay? I felt that I could deal with questions that were causal, and I could actually deal with those sorts of issues. And I was very influenced by ELIZA, the program by Weizenbaum. You know, that he built a system. It was very simple. It was about counselling. And all it did was, if you had a problem, you said what the problem was, and if you mentioned your brother, the next thing would come up, tell me about your brother, or something. There's a way of doing this, a way of counselling. It was very simple, but it was very effective. And in fact, it was so effective that Weizenbaum's secretary used to lock herself into her office at lunchtime. Nobody could come in, and she was using this system. So for not a lot of smart work under the bonnet of the computer, I believe we could do something. So we have free text entry based on causal questions, and there are no marks awarded. It's just to help you, so that instead of posing a question in the textbook and you going to the back and finding the answer, you actually did this online. So you couldn't cheat, yeah? I mean, I go to the back of the book and pretend I knew all the time. I'm sure other people do that as well. So, so we had to identify question types. We were looking for questions that had salient variables, yeah? And that the students would be asked to describe these variables, and also an identification of trends. So from the variables, you'd get an identification of trends, and you'd have this relationship between the variables, which would be the causality. So here's an example. In the history syllabus, it's always about the First World War, okay? Always they ask about, well, there's always something about wars. So I've put in here, no idea. That's the answer, right? I haven't got a clue. So this is what the system says. Maybe you're a bit confused by the question. It may be helpful to remember you're not being asked about the causes directly, but why the causes have been so extensively studied. Okay? So I'm not putting you off, trying to give you some support. And then, here's an answer. Something about the First World War, turning point in history, okay, etc. Feedback. Well done on this submission. This question doesn't ask about the causes directly, but why the causes have been so extensively studied. Again, it's telling you. Then the next bit, this is absolutely right. You've done well to use the term turning point. Now, in a minute, I'm going to show you how it all works underneath. But what influenced me was, well done, you've given an answer, is the work of Carol Dweck in the United States. And she's written extensively about motivation. But this study is really important, is statistically significant, was carried out in classrooms. And what she's saying is, praise for ability, per se, can hinder learning. So the smart guys in the class, we've all been in classes, yeah? And sometimes when I was at school, I'd think, if only I knew the questions beforehand, then I'd be able to put my hand up, and I'd be one of the smart guys. But praise often, in a group setting, and especially with young children as well, they quickly learn that praise equates being clever. So you're being told every time you're being clever. And when you get negative feedback, the child often thinks, I have no ability, I'm not clever, okay? And so it can be disempowering and demoralizing, and often you don't try, yeah? So let me show you what she did, or talk a little bit about it, to come to those conclusions. So these kids were in primary school, and they took some IQ tests, Raven's matrices. They're tests where you have to match symbols, yeah? You can't learn, it's nothing to do with writing, but matching symbols. Now, the first test, it was about medium difficulty. I don't suppose you could do it now. It might not be ethically correct, okay? Some of the children were praised for effort and some were praised for ability, okay? Then they did a second test, and that really was the tough one. And then they had a third test, which was medium difficulty. And guess what? The scores are up for the points people praise for effort. That's a big result, okay? And also, I think she's done some other tests as well, where those who were praised for effort just said they would go on and do some more examples. They carried on more than the ones who were praised for ability. And she says very clearly, and she's done case studies with people, you know, in all sorts of business, that people who see themselves as clever or praised and think they're clever, sorry, they probably are clever, I don't mean it like that, but what they don't do in life as they grow up, they never put themselves in positions where they can't be seen to be clever, okay? Instead of saying, well, you know, I'll have a go. And we all know with a thesis, writing a thesis, yeah? It's all about effort. It's all about winning, keeping going when times are really tough. And so this work, when I read it, it really influenced me. And I thought Dweck had something really important to say. And so what happened is, I'll show you now how the system works, okay? What we do first is the system detects errors. But in the feedback, and all the feedback, we're concentrating on and recognizing effort. What we're trying to do is to encourage you to have another go, okay? Really, so you've done well to start answering this question. Perhaps you misunderstood it. Instead, think about this, yeah? So you had a go, recognizing effort. Not easy to try and think about how you do that feedback, but that's what's happening in this system. So the system at first detects errors. And then it looks for omissions, okay? So have you left something out? And there might be, you know, something else that you've missed out. So what the system is doing, it's considering the role of P or whatever has been missed out. It's praising what's correct. Praise what's correct, because they'll be moving on in their responses. But point out to them what's missing. So omissions is one way. Then it's a request for clarification. You know that I hate this when people write on the, you know, when we give out our drafts of our courses or whatever, and somebody writes, clarify. Well, what does that mean? If I thought I wrote it clearly, you know, I wouldn't have given it in. Just tell me what it is that's not clear to help me. And of course, then you request the inference, because often, you know, in an answer, the inference isn't clear. You've given me the facts, but you've made me, as the reader, make the inference. And inferencing, what else do we do? Oh, check the causality, and then check the causal factors are weighted. And that was, I told this story on Wednesday, that, you know, I had to become a history student when I was trying to build this, and I couldn't get an A grade, only a C grade. And when I found out that the variables are weighted, I was ahead of the game. I could get an A grade. So that's how the system works underneath. Now, when I've been talking to our tutors at the university, and I've been showing them this, just from any domain, new tutors coming into us, I've asked them before we start, how would you train a robot to mark the way you do? Just as an introduction to this. And everybody says how they are trying to give the student maximum marks. I don't have a problem with that. You know, we're trying to give the student marks for what they've done. But they weren't thinking about the mistakes that were being made and pointing them out. So when I showed them this, they said, oh, but, you know, you're pointing out, you're looking at all the errors. And I said, yes, but if you don't look for the errors as well as the things that are right, how can you give feedback to support the student to do better? So looking for errors is not very popular in the literature. So, where are we now? Both these tools are open source. I think that I'm trying to move towards a vision of tool adaptation, yeah? But trying to do more work with the arts faculty, and in fact, the new project is with essays at master's level. But I think the feedback can help us change pedagogy, change the way we think about our teaching, and also to get a handle on misconceptions. And you know, as experienced teachers, we do know where the challenges come in our courses. So what I was trying to do was to get the students to reflect, to get some meta-knowledge. And so what were the things that I'm trying to get them to do in these tasks? So I think what I'm asking them to do is to find facts which are similar to each other. And I do believe, and looking at Piaget's work, that what we do to begin with is we start to classify and we start to group things together that are the same. And we do that as very young children, even pre-language. And then we want to know how a topic X might be disputed, and that's very academic and what we're doing, you know, at university. And if you're in sciences or whatever, you want to be able to make predictions about X. And more importantly, you want to know how to use X in an argument. And that's how you build a good essay. But really as well in your argument, you want to know how far that notion can be pushed. In what context does this work? Where is it not relevant to talk about this? This isn't making a good argument. And I think that the group that I work with, we're trying to support this with tools and strategies that praise effort to bring students along. And I just want to finish off with my new project, which is with Oxford University. And this is supporting automated feedback for short essay answers. And, oh, I need to go back. Can I go back? Ah, keyboard. Sorry. There is work on summarization. There's work on summarization of newspaper articles, and the natural language processing people know how to do that because journalists tend to put all their information in the first paragraph. But how summarization, I mean, in writing essays, there's a group that are asking their students to summarize as part of a writing exercise. But what's controversial is open is how summarization can actually help you move forward with an electronic system. This is our system, and we can see here that the natural language processing people use Python. They use toolkits within Python to do the work. Our front end is HTML5 to show to the student, the front end, about how we're going to display the data from the analysis. And what we're doing is we're summarizing and showing, first of all, we're showing keywords and key sentences and where they appear. And these can be seen in the text, and you can see the structure, and you can see what's happening from the output. These are very early days. We built this within 5 months, actually. So we're still working with this. And here we've got some keywords and phrases, and we're going to ask the students to do some sort of tasks, interactive tasks around these keywords. to rank them maybe, to put them in order, maybe to take some away that they think are irrelevant or whatever. And we can summarise. This is the top 3 sentences from the paper at the LAC conference. It was by the chair of the conference, and you know, it was just an introduction. And actually, those top sentences tell you everything that's in that short paper. He didn't say very much. He wasn't there to. It was just an editorial. And what we did as an exercise last week, we presented different literatures to each other, because we're all from different disciplines in the team. And we actually ran the key paper we were talking about through the system. We wrote the abstract, picking out the best sentences, and it was a better abstract than the person had put in the abstract. So I think we're making progress. It's early days. We pilot with a whole team in September. Now, we didn't use latent semantic analysis. We don't have a gold standard. Why? Because in this master's course, it's a professional course, and the tasks are not the same. It's not the same question. It's the same question, but you can answer it with respect to your own context, your own workplace. So there is no gold standard. We couldn't do one.